DIY Guide to Evolutionary Bottlenecks, Composting of Brains, and Self-Exploding Cosmic Jokes, Part 1. This is not about the virus. I was also going to insert revolutionary use of enemas in the title heading, but I'm afraid to seriously reduce my literati audience in doing so. There is no vaccine against stupidity. Albert Einstein. Doctors are men who prescribe medicines of which they know little, to cure diseases of which they know less, and human beings of whom they know nothing. Voltaire. You've come across some one-of-a-kind research here, folks, compiled in the first 2 months of the lockdown. If you have not yet realized it, we are well into the prophesized universal enlightenment age that arises as a response to abysmal darkness lying right in front of us as a species, and the very real possibility of mass extinction. Time Wave Zero is collapsing on itself, and the novelty of this concurrently happening news is through the roof. If you ride it, synchronicity manifests everywhere, including this very message arriving to your doorstep just as you're coming out for a breath of fresh air. Who would have thought Facebook would be the medium, but here we are. This is where my friends are at, and apart from intimacy of such a circle, there's no venue that I see that could equal the impact of reaching out in confidence. News becomes outdated before the print cools off, so please keep in mind that what you are about to receive is not just information, it is a transmission empowered by a lifelong study of how not to be in the way. I am being greatly helped by Soimetsa curanderos, who have cultivated indigenous understanding in myself that shed new light on everything I knew before. Reading to the end is optional, and many will not be able to follow because it will require switching to a high resonance frequency in order to catch a glimpse of truth, which may hurt like hell, but I greatly appreciate if you share it so that someone else may benefit of suffering this delivery. I'm by no means qualified to voice what needs to be said regarding the current situation in Peru, out of all the places on this round planet, yet my adoration and love for this country compels me to do my bit. I was, in fact, planning a different write-up to share with you, having learned of suffering and deaths in the family of indigenous friends related to the draconian measures taken by Peruvian authorities, precipitating this outpour in earnest. Apart from my own insights, this is a synthesis of understanding from many enlightened sources, which are quoted in italics. Peru is one of the most enigmatic places on the planet, with an incredibly rich historical and cultural heritage, whose people to this day embody spiritual connection with Pachamama, Mother Earth. The late Incas were the only society in human history where there was neither hunger nor poverty. This was apparently possible because of their cultivated belief in reciprocity and their well-lubricated system of redistribution from above and all the way down. Reciprocity is the basic principle of give and take, which is still known today as Aini. People are by far the most valuable asset of Peru, in my mind. The warmth of their welcoming hospitality to total strangers is nothing short of disarming, and more often than not, the poorest folk living in primitive conditions are generous beyond comprehension of the average gringo for reasons of selflessness that are commonly lacking in the developed world. It's easy, in fact, to be open-hearted in Peru. Sometimes your wallet suffers as a consequence, but that is expected, given that the vast majority of Peruvians live in destitute poverty, and the fruit of their hard-earned labor is sold for peanuts to overseas importers, or simply harvested by global corporate entities that own distribution chains as well as factories and production plants themselves. It's no secret that the wealth is concentrated in the hands of the few privileged magnates and oil barons whose formula of success does not include notions of gratitude or fairness, not to mention reciprocity. There's beyond doubt that global conglomerates driving forth scientific development and exploitation of natural resources to satisfy the proverbial customer has become a form of self-imposed slavery. This has led humanity as a whole to the very edge of extinction, an extinction that has been steadily and inexorably happening, picking up revs as population and economic growth increases. We're winding up toward a collective apotheosis as predicted by escalation of novelty and several ancient prophecies, while being warned by awoken artificial intelligence-run simulations on available to-date data that man is a threat to his own future, as well as the future of all living beings, and should be eradicated like a virus, courtesy of sophisticated deep learning algorithms running in neural networks, so dubbed for mimicking the interconnected structure of the human brain. I find it rather ironic, considering such verdict to come from technology designed by the best of scientific thought. It speaks volumes both about the fruits of our science and our thinking models. Regarding the above-mentioned eradication, Terence McKenna has been saying this back in the 1990s. The apocalypse is not something which is coming. The apocalypse has arrived in major proportions of the planet, and it's only because we live within a bubble of incredible privilege and social insulation that we still have the luxury of anticipating the apocalypse. If you go to Bosnia or Somalia or Peru or much of the Third World, then it appears that the apocalypse has already arrived. He nailed this one on the head. Sidewalks on the streets of Lima are lined with folks who have been reduced to the vocal box attachment of vending machines, selling shoelaces and household plastics from China out of sheer desperation. Once the proud descendants of Incas, Mochicas, and Tiwanaku, many Peruvians now resort to drowning their sorrows in alcohol if they can afford it, or fermented beverages if not, for their lives have lost both purpose and meaning. Why? Because it's not natural for a human being to be a machine, inherently good-natured and bred over millennia to endure imposed from above fate. The majority of Peruvians have almost infinite tolerance. They will lie down in their coffins and let their family nail the lid nicely, if this is what was required of them by high authority. It's more dignified than being manhandled amongst all the screaming and protesting and still end up suffocating in the tight box where supreme policymakers want you for one reason or another. Closer to home in the liberal West, Edward Bernays, father of public relations and propaganda, has put it quite succinctly. We are governed, our minds are moulded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. Therefore, the greatest weapon indeed is neither the gun nor the bomb, it is the control of information. To control the world's information is to manipulate all the minds that consume it. The current situation in Peru, which has overnight degraded from habitually chaotic to oppressively dreadful, needs to be examined in the light of new understanding, which is ultimately, I believe, all that's needed. If you give people light, they will find their own way. The ongoing pandemic is not the first occurrence of violent takeover and mass subjugation that happened to the Americas. Most notable precedents have been set by the Spaniards, the Portuguese, and the Brits, who managed to wipe out more natives than the total number of people killed in World War II by far superior technology of destruction. And all for the love of gold. Common knowledge attributes the major part of these deaths to infectious diseases, rather than the chilling cunningness of Cortez and Francisco Pizarro, and thus hugely underestimates murderous geniuses, as well as covering up atrocities inflicted on the local populace by indiscriminate plagues. As far as smallpox goes, it is claimed that the crews of the ships that arrived in the New World spread disease easily because they were highly contagious and lethal. It's also claimed that these sailors remained unaffected by the germs they carried throughout the long voyage across the Atlantic Ocean. If, however, European sailors were immune to all these diseases, due to the presence of the appropriate antibodies, they would likewise be free of germs, if you think about it. In any case, the so-called savages had better sanitation and living conditions than most of their conquering invaders. Cities in Europe took their drinking water from the fetid and polluted rivers nearby, while the Aztec citadel of Tenochtitlan had their water come from clandestine springs deep within the mainland that was piped into the city by a huge aqueduct system that amazed Cortez and his men. Just as they were astonished also by the personal cleanliness and hygiene of the colourfully dressed populace, and by the use of soaps, deodorants, and breath sweeteners. Coincidentally, one of the most significant contributions to the substantial reduction in morbidity and mortality from disease, especially smallpox, in Europe was the implementation of sanitary reforms, but this is an inconvenient truth in a way because it reverses the notion of who the true savages were. For Pizarro, it was a lot simpler back then. All one needed was a holy book and the Pope's blessing to slay and plunder a superior civilization which one didn't understand for a profit. As long as a 10th part went to the Vatican, that sealed the deal. Exquisitely made objects of art and worship were melted down into bricks to be shipped back home, while Atahualpa got murdered and his confinement after delivery of the promised ransom in a gesture of sheer cruelty. Dr. Stannard describes, "The troops went wild, stealing, killing, raping and torturing natives, trying to force them to divulge the whereabouts of the imagined treasure houses of gold." Using the above-mentioned methods, the Spanish acquired the golden jewellery they desired. When no more could be collected directly from the people, they proceeded to establish mines, using the local population as a workforce to extract the precious metals from the ground. Natives endured appalling conditions within the mines. In addition to the dangers of falling rocks, poor ventilation, and the violence of their brutal overseers, as the Indian labourers chipped away at the rock faces of the mines, they released and inhaled the poisonous vapours of cinnabar, arsenic, and mercury. For as long as there appeared to be an unending supply of brute labour, it was cheaper to work an Indian to death and then replace him or her with another native than it was to feed and care for either of them properly. It is probable that the life expectancy of an Indian engaged in forced labour at a mine or on a plantation during the early years of the Spanish Terror in Peru was not much more than 3 or 4 months. Eduardo Galeano describes in his book Open Veins of Latin America that the Caribbean island populations finally stopped paying tribute because they had disappeared. They were totally exterminated in the gold mines. Another significant and largely unmentioned cause of death was Indians taking poison or hanging themselves. Some had attempted to retaliate and died in the process, unable to stand up to the steel weapons of the conquistadors. Others chose instead to flee, which resulted in the crops being left to rot in the fields as the Indians attempted to escape the frenzy of the conquistadors' attacks. Isn't it very much what we are seeing now, happening to agriculture everywhere, as the pandemic flower unfurls its deathly petals? Next on the menu, if one is to follow this recipe from the past, is starvation. The indigenous population of Hispaniola plummeted from 8 million to virtually 0 between the years of 1496 to 1535. This devastation in Hispaniola was not unique and represents a typical example of the almost total annihilation of the indigenous populations that occurred throughout the land now known as America. With the blessing and much encouragement of the Vatican, of course. The Spanish were not the only conquerors of the New World. The Portuguese established themselves in Brazil, and within just 20 years, the native peoples of Brazil were well along the road to extinction, which is of course a prescribed medicine for barbarians. The arrival of the British saw that starvation and the massacre of non-combatants was becoming the preferred approach to dealing with the natives, after military confrontations had established a new master race. It's fairly inconceivable for a Western mind, or any mind frame for that matter, to accept the extent of corruption and psychosis that would lead to the genocide of human beings on such a scale. Some 250 million natives died within a century of conquest. It's much more ethical to blame it on otherwise innocuous germs. However, an error does not become truth by reason of multiplied propagation, nor does truth become error because nobody sees it, as Mahatma Gandhi says. Let us dig into the germ theory to gain a sense of perspective. This is going to be quite a deviation, crossing this dry desert of medical history, but please bear with me. Louis Pasteur, elevated on a high pedestal as founder of serology, was the first to suggest that diseases are caused by germs. According to him, germs or pathogens are after us because they need a host organism to prey on for their own survival, and infectious diseases are a direct result of that, a theory Pasteur retracted at the time of his death. In microscopic studies of host tissues in such diseases, it was repeatedly observed that germs proliferated while many host cells were dying. Being highly motivated to achieve success and possessing strong nerves, Pasteur had caused much suffering in dying animals through his callousness and the absence of desired results before moving to experimentation on human beings in the later stages of his research. Pasteur and his colleague Robert Koch concluded that germs attack and destroy healthy cells and thereby start a disease process in the body. This assumption has worked its way into the world of science in the 20th century, getting under the skin of medical personnel and doctors, and thus the myth that germs cause infection and disease has become an undisputed reality. Today, this idea continues to prevail as a fundamental scientific truth in the modern medical system and is passed down the line in all educational propaganda like a hot potato. Pasteur could just as easily have concluded that bacteria are naturally attracted to sites of increased cellular death, just like they are attracted to decaying organic matter elsewhere in nature. In fact, bacteria and their feasting preference are not that different from flies, ants, crows, or vultures, who are all drawn towards death. This is an undisputed law of nature as far as critters who are mopping up havoc are concerned. Why would this be different within the body? Weak, damaged or dead cells in the human body are just as prone to germ infection as an overripe or bruised fruit. Had the forefathers of germ theory assumed that cells die for non-apparent biochemical reasons, such as toxicity buildup, our current thinking about illness and health would be quite different. As it is, Pasteur's germs are equal to disease theory basically ignored or at least bypassed the immune system and its awesome powers of healing. But then, who cares about the natural immune system and its awesome powers of healing when you can make megabucks selling vaccines? Obviously, science doesn't care, because scientific research is bought and sold by corporations that make profit from your life and death. Let's not be ignorant of the obvious and learn from the past, otherwise there's no stopping of buying into today's propaganda the same way that our parents and grandparents bought into asbestos, DDT, and a multitude of quick fixes that miraculously delivered solutions to problems without investing any thought into what caused the problem in the first place, and came with problems of their own. Most of the above relating to germs being a precursor to disease can be found in extensive research by Andreas Moritz, Robert Morse, Dawn Lester, and David Parker, all of which I have personally used, among many other people, to improve my health and get back to enjoying the human body in my 40s before it packs up due to inevitable failure of a clogged up filtering organs. We live in an increasingly polluted environment, and one must clean the liver the same that one must change the oil filter on a car. Try to avoid doing it, and you'll know the consequences soon enough. Einstein noted that the same method of thinking that caused the problem in the first place cannot be used to fix it. Please keep an open mind. Moritz sums up succinctly a pivotal understanding that empowers the individual's ability to heal while rejecting current models of dealing with man-made pandemics. Contrary to common opinion, viruses don't kill people. If someone is sick and also has a virus, he or she is not sick because of the virus. A sickness must first exist before a virus can show up. Virus is designed to induce healing, not illness. Let that sink in a little. Is it not that the planet is healing through imposed lockdown? A total arrest of commuting and air travel has done marvels as far as cleaning up air pollution goes, hasn't it? There were pink flamingos in the Great Salt Lake, royal jellyfish swimming in the Venetian canals again, wild elephants wandering in the streets of Indian villages, and the Himalayas had come back into unobstructed view after the smoke of Chinese towns was gone off the horizon. If we continue having the virus, we might heal the Earth back to how she was before we assaulted her in an overzealous plunder of natural resources to extract and burn. Just a thought. The relationship between germs and humans is not merely commensal, a non-harmful coexistence, but is rather a mutualistic relationship. The microorganisms perform a host of useful functions, such as fermenting unused energy substrates, training the immune system, preventing the growth of parasitic species, regulating the development of the gut, producing vitamins and hormones. We need them, they need us, kind of deal. Rudolf Virchow, father of pathology, referred to by his colleagues as the Pope of Medicine, lamented on his deathbed, "If I could live my life over again, I would devote it to proving that germs seek their natural habitat, diseased tissue, rather than being the cause of the diseased tissue." If the body becomes overtaxed with toxins and trapped metabolic waste products, cells may suffer severe oxygen and nutrient deprivation and subsequently become damaged or die. An immune reaction, such as fever, is meant to cleanse the body of these harmful substances. The presence of infection in this situation, to encourage inflammatory response of the body, is not only natural, but desirable. Furthermore, microorganisms become only pathogenic as our health deteriorates. In most cases, the disease itself becomes the medicine to cleanse the affected organs and systems of the body and return it to health. In situations of extreme toxicity, severe physical congestion, or the overuse of medical drugs and vaccines, the immune system may be so overwhelmed by the toxins it tries to eliminate that it may not be able to save the individual. There are many new diseases that were never there before, if we look at the last couple of 100 years. They seem to pop up like mushrooms after a good rain. One could argue that science has made progress in classifying and systematizing diseases under the use of modern space-age technology, or one could consult a known Hindu mystic for enlightening explanation, which makes more sense to me. That's what science is doing all over the world, trying to remove illness completely. But the more science tries to avoid illness, the more new diseases arise. Without illness, no health is possible, because you close one door to illness, another has to be opened immediately by nature. You're doing a foolish thing. You close one door, now no more malaria, no more plague. Two doors have to be opened somewhere else. And if you're mad about closing doors, and science is closing all of the doors, then more dangerous diseases will arise. Because if you close 1,000,000 doors of illnesses, then nature has to open a very, very great door so that it balances the millions of doors. Then cancer comes in, you cure diseases, and you create incurable diseases. Cancer is a new phenomenon. It was never before in the world, and it is incurable. Why is it incurable? Because nature is defending its law. You go on curing every disease so that something incurable has to be created, otherwise man will be dead. Without illness, nobody will be healthy. And this is going to happen. It seems someday cancer will be cured. Then nature will immediately create something more incurable. And remember, in this fight, science cannot win and should not win. Nature should always be the winner. Nature is wiser than all your scientists put together. Nature cures itself. In fact, nature cures. Coming back to viruses, they are designed to induce healing, not illness. They're not causing the disease as much as mosquitoes do not cause stagnant pools in which they breed to become stagnant. Sure, it's easy to fix yourself a vaccine to kill off an infection, which is merely used to break down harmful substances like metals, drugs, chemicals, pesticides, trans fatty acids, artificial sweeteners. A quick fix, and one could go back to the lifestyle of waste and destruction with a clear conscience, having averted the inevitable and defeated the plague. Toxic substances, however, do not go away by themselves. Some are naturally broken down by the body, but most of them require bacteria to dispose of them. Florence Nightingale remarked, "The specific disease doctrine is the grand refuge of weak, uncultured, unstable minds such as now rule in the medical profession. There are no specific diseases. There are specific disease conditions." And that is when the body makes viruses or allows them to be made and spread through the body via the blood and lymph. Hence, we don't need to destroy viruses. They're on our side. They're inert proteins that the body produces in order to attack and dissolve such noxious substances. Unlike bacteria, viruses are not living organisms. They're actually microscopic strips of genetic material, DNA and RNA, housed inside a capsule. Unlike bacteria, they cannot reproduce because they have no digestive system or reproductive system. The human body makes more of these solvents when it needs to dissolve harmful substances, and it stops making them when the danger of cellular suffocation has subsided. Viruses act effectively just like solvents and paint cleaners and play an important role in the detoxification process. They don't stop being reproduced because the body attacks them. They diminish when the body no longer needs them. The bottom line is that viruses can only become active and increase in number in a toxic body that cannot be cleaned up by bacteria or the body itself. Given statistics on COVID-19, it is readily apparent to be the case. Overwhelming majority of lethal outcomes are seen in aged people with pre-existing conditions, such as cancer, pneumonia, diabetes. To assume that viruses attack and kill people indiscriminately is not a far throw from believing in a random universe. As Einstein concluded, having looked fairly hard into this question, God does not play dice. Glancing in the mirror or admiring the familiar features of a loved one, we hold organization of matter to be a self-evident truth. If there was no guiding principle to observe phenomena, we'd all still be floating in the primordial soup of quasi-particles, incapable of condensing into any meaningful molecular arrangements. And none of the remarkable people quoted here would have had an opportunity of existing in the flesh, let alone investing their energy into investigative inquiry of our natural laws. What we are seeing happening in the world today is not a random viral attack. It is a direct response to a lifestyle of greed, pollution, and unsustainability. For better or worse, there's no going back to the comfortable ignorance administered by a prick of the needle in officially designated locations. You have to do your own inoculation, be it with a truth serum or a bunch of shelf-stock lies broadcast in public media 24/7 among ads for battling hair loss and junk food. The choice is yours. Even more pertinent to the discussion at hand, the old physicist, may his soul rest in peace, poignantly points out that there is no vaccine against stupidity. Speaking of magical quick fixes, vaccinating an individual to invoke antibody production interferes with the body's most basic healing mechanisms, and Moritz considered it to be one of modern medicine's most dangerous weapons. He says, truly a weapon of mass destruction. This quote is taken from his article dating a decade ago, 2010. I won't go into reiteration of his entire research here. It is fairly substantial and in-depth, but this is worth attention. There is no doubt that pandemics are man-made or due to vaccination programs, starvation, poor hygiene, and antibiotics, all of which compromise the immune system. Bacteria and viruses do not viciously or indiscriminately attack us. Nature does not fight against itself. If it did, we would all be dead. There is no war between humans and nature, unless, of course, we try to destroy it or upset the balance of natural forces and resources, and subsequently refer to the rebalancing process as disease or natural disaster. Still, the masses have fallen for the pseudoscience as it has been deftly presented to them. It seems that not much has changed since William Shakespeare's day. What a terrible era in which idiots govern the blind. Actually, idiots, dangerous as they were back in the Renaissance, have evolved in leaps and bounds into much more sinister entities, simply because our ability to effect change on a global scale is unprecedented in human history. Healthcare in the early 21st century is almost completely controlled by vested interests, which claim that their system, known as modern medicine, is the only genuine form of healthcare, and that all other forms are to be regarded as pseudoscience and quackery. Furthermore, the majority of the chemical ingredients of pharmaceuticals, both medicines and vaccines, are inherently toxic to the human body. Many medicines are intentionally toxic. For example, the purpose of antibiotics and antivirals is to kill germs, and the purpose of cancer treatments is to kill cancerous cells. What they ask you to believe is that it is possible to poison a body back to health. Herbert Shelton's insight goes that the only legitimate study of drugs and their relation to the body is that of toxicology, the local, general, synergistic, antagonistic, therapeutic, and physiological actions of drugs are myths, equally with their empiric actions. That they accumulate in the body, that they occasion side actions, that they poison and injure, we do not deny. We only deny that they ever do anything else. I have been baptized in the pharmaceutical church as a child, having been exposed to needles and pills religiously for a lack of understanding of my body's ability to heal that goes hand in hand with trust in life. The human body is not mechanistic in nature. It is a complex, self-regulating organism that is the only agent capable to defeat disease. It is only the body that is able to restore and maintain health, which is the body's natural state. Nature is the best therapy. An early morning walk, fresh air, a lush green garden, nutritious food prepared with love, the sight of a sunset with your beloved, the sound of raindrops and flowing water is all that heals us. Anything that connects us to our real nature or brings us close to nature can act as therapy. So what do you expect after locking down an entire population of a city inside concrete walls if not a pandemic? A problem can only be solved when the nature of that problem has been fully understood and its root cause or causes have been correctly identified. Since doctors are men who prescribe medicines of which they know little, to cure diseases of which they know less, and human beings of whom they know nothing, Voltaire's observation, it is clear that the problem of disease remains unresolved by the medical establishment. Furthermore, it is not ever a problem that is in the process of being resolved, it is a continually worsening problem. The health of the vast majority of the people around the world is deteriorating and not improving. Dawn Lester and David Parker write that one of the main contributory factors is the fact that the medical establishment, which has assumed responsibility for the health of the entire world population, operates from the basis of fundamentally flawed beliefs about diseases and their causes as well, as the methods by which they should be treated and prevented. The illness not only continues to exist as before, it also continues to worsen for large numbers of people, despite the treatments and preventatives employed by so-called modern medicine. The logical conclusion to be drawn from this is that modern medicine has failed to thoroughly understand the nature of the problem and has similarly failed to correctly identify all of the root causes. In other words, pharmaceutical solutions do not remove the causes of illness and instead exacerbate them. And this is what is sold to you, quite literally, for a killing. The failings of modern medicine with respect to disease are solely due to the flawed nature of the theories on which its practices have been based. This is not a palatable kind of truth, but then again, all truth passes through three stages. First, it is ridiculed. Second, it is violently opposed. And third, it is accepted as being self-evident. This according to philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer. To bring this rhetoric home, I must add that when Rudolf Virchow investigated typhus, an epidemic in Upper Silesia, he coined a well-known aphorism: "Medicine is a social science, and politics is nothing else but medicine on a larger scale." Virchow was both a scientist and a prominent public figure in Germany in the 19th century, which gave him sufficient insight to dispense with fluffy notions of charitable causes involved in the business of keeping the population sick. Medical terms, leukemia and thrombosis, were his inventions. Unlike Dr. Bill Gates, he actually had his credentials in the field of medical research. Peru being one of the targeted testing grounds for vaccine trials, the following question is pertinent to ask. Is it too far-fetched to believe that vaccination is being used as a deliberate means to manipulate, scare, and even kill people in nations where a lack of literacy subdues the will of the people and discourages them from asking any questions? This, again, is a quote from Moritz, but I will sign my name under it any day. After all, what better way to control entire nations than by keeping them sick, weak, impoverished, and at the mercy of donors? There are powerful material benefits in doing so, not least of which are their abundant natural resources like oil. One look into the history of AIDS and HIV in African countries will bring into focus a whole plethora of controversial evidence that has spawned volumes of anti-vaccine research, and for good reason. The idea that there are vested interests whose aim is to gain control over the systems that govern virtually all aspects of life may seem highly controversial, but that does not invalidate the idea itself. And as of late, it is gaining acceptance by an ever larger number of people as they become increasingly aware that those governing systems do not function in a manner in which they are reported to function. This is blatantly obvious from the evidence that most problems are worsening, not improving as they are claimed to. Why? Primarily because vested interests have an entirely different agenda from that of solving all humanity's problems. For instance, UNIDO, United Nations Industrial Development Organization, makes the claim that industrialization has helped lift hundreds of millions of people around the globe out of poverty over the last 200 years. Really? With 1 in 9 people currently suffering from a basic lack of nutrition, I dare say humanity fared far better back in the day. Industrialization may have provided employment for millions of people, but has not necessarily lifted them out of poverty. As British economist E.F. Schumacher writes in his book Small is Beautiful, a study of economics as if people mattered, the result of development is that a fortunate minority have their fortunes greatly increased, while those who really need help are left more helpless than ever. Slavery, unlike world authorities would like one to believe, has never been abolished, but simply transformed to voluntary subjugation by choice, thus eliminating the need for physical flagellation. The whip is no longer needed, since there's no resistance to a prescribed lifestyle of poverty and hardship, which is not even questioned in Peru, as it has been taken for granted since Pizarro's men installed themselves in place of the Inca royal family. One is practically born into it. I have witnessed, in fact, Peruvian miners digging for gold in the same mining sites next to old Spanish shafts using the same hand tools as 200 years ago, with the single exception of detonating the odd stick of dynamite. Boom! Off goes an explosion some 4,800 meters above sea level. It takes your breath away just to be trucked up there, never mind pushing a wheelbarrow in and out of a dark tunnel all day long, inhaling mineral dust between gulps of rarefied oxygen. Only coca leaves save the day, if you're lucky to have some brought up by a curious gringo. I must say, gold digging by hand is a rarity. It does not create nearly as much damage as its mechanized counterpart. Peru, like most developing countries, is plagued by industrial pollution caused by the mining sector, which is responsible for some of the largest releases of heavy metals into the environment of any industry. One of the reasons for booming industrialization in the Third World can be attributed to the increasingly common practice that involves the relocation of the most polluting aspects of the mining industry to developing countries. From the Occupational Knowledge International website. In addition to being the repositories of some of the polluting activities of industries based in developed countries, many developing countries are also the source of a variety of valuable natural resources, such as gold. Therefore, resource-rich developing countries will continue to be affected by the extraction industries, whether owned by native industrialists or those from other countries, until those resources have been depleted or are no longer commercially viable. It's inevitable that Peru, among other developing countries, will continue to suffer environmental degradation, especially by extraction industries, and that its population will continue to suffer the resulting adverse health effects. Almost certainly, health problems due to environmental degradation by the operations of virtually all industries will be erroneously identified by the medical establishment as communicable diseases that are claimed to disproportionately affect developing countries and to be treatable or preventable with medicines and vaccines. That was quoted in italics once again from Dawn Lester and David Parker. The increasingly common practice of industry relocations owes its origin to globalization, as one would expect, under the pretext of benefits to developing countries and their populations. In reality, fast food joints and cell phones can hardly outweigh the many detrimental consequences, such as adverse health effects that accompany environmental pollution. In spite of this, the Peruvian government believes that the influx of capital investment will generate benefits for its people by providing them with employment and to earn the standard of living enjoyed by Western countries. Andrew Rowell explains that third world governments, lured by the illusion of trickle-down capital and tempted by the dreams of technology transfer, have actually encouraged this corporate and capital flight into the deregulated zone by setting them up in their own countries. The nature of such deregulated zones means that they certainly generate benefits, but these are enjoyed almost exclusively by the corporations, with the country, its people and environment suffering the consequences. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our politics. The most brutal and ruthless among us rise to the top, and everyone else has a foot on their neck. Terence McKenna was fairly good at delivering this essential understanding, while attributing his best insight to the mushroom. How about this one? What was created by the era of the proper gentleman was excellent table manners and genocide over most of the surface of the planet. That's right, culture is not your friend. Culture is for other people's convenience and the convenience of various institutions, churches, companies, tax collection schemes, and what have you. It's not your friend. It insults you, it disempowers you, it uses and abuses you. None of us are well treated by culture. Good old McKenna, however, does not forget to remind in the same breath that you are a divine being and that you come from realms of unimaginable power and light, and that you will return to those realms. Politics and divine light don't mix. From the definition of oneness, would one have debates, lawsuits, and censorship sitting underneath the Bodhi tree in the wilderness? For the love of figs, no, only if one's affected by schizophrenia, which is a prerequisite for entering into the governing structures in order to make decisions that perpetuate lies, deception, and mind control. Why? Because any power structure is nourished by conflict. Otherwise, there would not have been 5,000 wars in 3,000 years. Authority has destroyed, but has not created anything. Osho has said that it is the politician who is creating the atomic weapons, the nuclear missiles. With what face can he make the people of the world aware that the future is dark and dismal? Perhaps there is no future anymore. Perhaps we are sitting on a volcano which can erupt at any moment. Already we have so many nuclear weapons that we can destroy 700 planets the size of our Earth. In other words, we can kill every man 700 times over. Can you imagine the stupidity of it? A poor man simply dies one time. There was no need to kill him 700 times. turn on the idiot box and here is Donald Trump in his latest address to the world, assuring an ever-preparedness of military bases to repel all and any attacks during the lockdown. Don't test us, or we will retaliate and blow you all to hell. My concise version of the president's speech, minus boasting about his weapons systems readiness. There is a certain madness behind it. The madness is that the politician can only live if there is war.
Confrontation was not created by the police. The confrontation was created by the people who charged the police. Gentlemen, get the thing straight once and for all. The policeman isn't there to create disorder. The policeman is there to preserve disorder.
In his autobiography, Adolf Hitler has written that the only way for a man to enter politics and become a great historical figure is to create a great war. Without war, you don't have heroes. Just think of Alexander the Great, Napoleon, Genghis Khan, Stalin, Adolf again, Winston Churchill. His enemy, the war, brought them to the pinnacle of their glory, and our whole history is full of these idiots. One can surmise that if we have any sense, we should completely stop studying this kind of history in schools and universities. Can't you study beautiful people, creative people? We have produced great musicians. We've produced great scientists. We've produced great poets. We have produced great painters. Our history should remember them. Our history should remind us that they are our real forefathers, not Genghis Khan or Tamerlane or Napoleon. Those should not even have a place in the footnotes of history books. They should simply be ignored. They were mad people, and there's no need to go on studying them and creating the same kind of desire for madness in a new generation. While we're at it, here's Osho's commentary, dating back to the late 80s, on organized religion, which is simply another form of politics. Just as I have always condemned politics as the lowest activity of human beings, the same is my attitude about organized religions. You can see it. The priests and the politicians have always been in a conspiracy against humanity. They have been supporting each other. They have divided things between themselves so that your worldly life belongs to the politician. He is the ruler there, and your inner life belongs to the priest. He is the ruler there. Religions are living on poverty. The poor go to them because they are suffering. It is unbearable. They need some kind of consolation. The rich don't go there. They're not suffering. And if they are in a certain anguish, these priests are not capable of helping them. The rich people, feeling frustrated, have to search for somebody who can help them out of their anguish. They don't want opium. This is why the politicians don't want everybody to become rich, because it is more difficult to enslave rich people than poor. It is easier to purchase the votes of the poor than to convince the rich people to vote for them. The richer a person becomes, the more out of hand he is as far as politicians are concerned. I don't have any interest in the outside world, in politics, but I have immense interest in you. You are living in a world which is ugly, sick, one foot in the grave, and I don't want you to be drowned with this sick world. That's why I speak against many things. I speak against politics because I don't want you to remain ignorant of who the real criminals are in this world. That's why I speak against the priests and religions, because I don't want any single loophole for you. You have to be aware of who the criminals are. The problem is that those criminals are thought to be great leaders, sages, saints, Mahatmas, and they are tremendously respected around the world. You would never think that they could be criminals. So I have to insist continuously, every day. As a summary to what has just been said, I may add a quick note from Nikola Tesla, known as a mad futurist to this day. Peace can only come as a natural consequence of universal enlightenment. Instead, we seem to be heading for a new world order by the look of things. Not quite my flavor as far as utopias go, judging from the unscrupulous clique of homicidal maniacs in charge. I hope Sir Thomas More doesn't turn in his grave when I invite a flashback from a statement given to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee on February 17, 1950 by James Warburg. We shall have world government whether or not you like it, by conquest or consent. In 1992, this rhetoric was upheld by Strobe Talbot, President Clinton's Deputy Secretary of State. In the next century, nations as we know it will be obsolete. All states will recognize a single global authority. National sovereignty wasn't such a great idea after all. One doesn't need to be a conspiracy theorist to have a clue what's coming. Simple arithmetic will do. We are on the verge of a global transformation. All we need is the right major crisis, and the nations will all accept the New World Order. Guess who's been spilling champagne at elitist tables? None other than David Rockefeller. As McKenna used to say, don't worry. You don't know enough to worry. Who do you think you are that you should worry, for crying out loud? Speaking of vested interests in generating major crises, I better include Osho's rant spoken over 30 years ago. There's every possibility that there will be no future as far as life is concerned. We are coming closer to a dead-end street. It is sad to recognize the fact, but it is good to recognize it because then there is a possibility of taking a different turn. As things are moving today, the logical conclusion is a global suicide, and the most alarming factor is that the intelligentsia of the world, the scientists of the world, the philosophers of the world, are ignoring all these facts. It should be a determination in every intelligent being that we are not going to allow any vested interest to destroy this planet. To save man, it's to save the greatest creation in the universe. It has taken 4 million years for this earth to create man. It is so precious, and the future is much more valuable. If anything is to be done for the future, this is the time. Otherwise, the greatest evolution of consciousness in the universe will disappear. This will not only be a loss to the Earth, but to the whole universe. In these millions of years, we've been able to create some possibility of consciousness, but we do not have time to wait for nature to go on developing in its slow way. Nature has eternity available to it. We do not. We have only 12 years in our hands until the end of the 20th century. For example, a report of the United Nations from the World Commission on the Environment and Development says our common future has called for sustainable development to save the planet and has defined this as meeting the basic needs of the present without consuming the resources of the future. The report also recognizes that if something has to be done, it should be done now, otherwise there is no future. The conclusion is true, but the report is cunning. It is cunning in the sense that it does not talk about who has created the present problems. If we are going to solve the problems of the future and dissolve them, then we have to look for their roots in the past. It is our whole past in all its dimensions that has given rise to this dangerous situation. But nobody talks about this because no previous generation has ever bothered about the future. For thousands of years, man has been living the way he has wanted to, and he has simply forced the next generation to live in his way. This is no longer possible. We have to take a quantum leap and teach the new generation not to live the way we have lived. Only then can the future be changed. This crisis is a golden crisis because people only change under great stress. If a crisis is tolerable, people will tolerate it. But we are now at a point where things are no longer tolerable. There is no more time for commissions and their reports. Aren't we, the new generation, the lucky ones, to behold the very climax of this millennia-year-old experiment? Wouldn't it be unfairy tale-like to end up in the apocalyptic version of the script, having destroyed everything in spite of all the bedtime stories of saviors and heroes coming to the rescue at the last possible moment? In spite of Kylo Ren reuniting, albeit in his ghostly form, with Rey Skywalker to blast through Palpatine's fleet, miraculously channeling all Jedi powers at the last nick of time, after everyone watched her drop dead and go into uncontrollable shakes, will we allow global extinction? While you and I fell in love, fought, begged forgiveness, and watched the latest Star Wars sagas downloaded free of charge, world governments worked hard and with a great purpose. There's been a few trial crises in the last 20 years, but none so fitting the New World Order description as coronavirus. It ticked all the boxes. Back in 2009, a swine flu outbreak and mass hysteria whipped up during this plague instigated the Pandemic Response Act in Massachusetts that sanctions the governor to declare a state of emergency and treat common citizens as terror suspects if they do not submit to forced vaccinations. Andreas Moritz has written the following 10 years ago. This legislation outrageously allows the police to forcefully enter people's homes without a warrant, forcefully quarantine residents, remove children from their homes, and vaccinate them against their own will and that of their parents, and give the state's governor the power to impose martial law. When a state of pandemic is declared, citizens seem to have little choice but to submit to the state law or face criminal charges. And since the state follows the dictates of the World Health Organization, which has 194 signatories, that means that potentially the populations of 194 countries could be subjected to measures such as those adopted in Massachusetts if their respective governments so choose. Well, it's no surprise to see military police enforcing curfew on the cobbled streets of small Sacred Valley towns and shaky smartphone video footage. Bring forth the clowns. Give citizens bells and whistles to dob each other in. This works fine here in Aotearoa, but not in Peru. What is lacking in social programming must be made up by a stick. To be continued in Part 2 and Part 3 of the DIY Guide to Evolutionary Bottlenecks, Composting Brains, and Self-Exploding Cosmic Jokes.